hello, I'm Chibundu Onuzo. It's funny actually, when people call me doctor, I say, oh, no, it's fine. You can just call me Chibundu. But if you dare introduce me without my doctor, now fight to PhD is not a joke. Anyways, so I'm Chibundu Onuzo. I am a novelist principally. I'm a writer. I write novels. I write for The Guardian sometimes. I also write for newspapers. And I'm also a historian. So I have a PhD in history, and I lectured for a year at the School of Oriental and African Studies. But at the moment, I'm writing full-time. So I grew up in Lagos, Nigeria, the center of excellence or the center of Jagbajantis, depending on who you are talking to. But I grew up in Lagos. My father is Igbo and my mother is Yoruba. And I lived in Lagos till I was 14. I went to boarding school in Ekpe for just 2 and just 3. But principally, I grew up and lived in Lagos. And I had a fairly typical middle-class childhood. Both my parents were doctors, and there were always a lot of books in the house. So I actually started writing from a very young age. So the first novel I attempted was when I was 10. But the interesting thing about this novel was that it was set in America, and all the characters in the novel were white. And I remember giving my mother this novel to read when I was 10. And she was very confused. And she was wondering, why is Chibundu Onuzo writing a book full of Jack and Jane and Tom and Robert? And of course, the reason behind this was that a lot of the media, a lot of the culture that I consumed, and I'm sure a lot of people on this call would have consumed when they were younger, it was American films, American cartoons, sometimes a couple of British films, but there was certainly this sense or this feeling for a lot of people of my generation. I was born in 1991. There's certainly this feeling that Oyinbo was better, Western was better, American was better. And it wasn't something that I would say that my parents were proudly Nigerian, we ate Nigerian food at home and all of that. We were proudly Nigerian. But at the same time, that shows you how powerful sort of media and culture is. So even though I was surrounded by African culture and surrounded by African people and Black people and surrounded by actual Black people who were successful and thriving, because the media I consumed was mostly Western, I somehow still learned to rate Western achievement and Western culture more than I rated Nigerian culture. And we watched Channel O and, listen to American music, just American and British. America was at the top. Britain was, sort of number 2. So when my mother read this book that I wrote with these white characters, she asked me, why don't I write about something I know? Why don't I write about something closer to home? Why don't I write about Nigeria, Lagos, basically? And I just remember thinking, no, Lagos is not interesting. What do you mean write about Lagos? It's hamburger and milkshake that is interesting, not Ewa going and, I don't know, Begiri or whatever. That's not a very nice standing combination. Anyways, so all the while I lived in Nigeria, all the stories I was writing, a lot of the characters were white. And so I had a lot of books when I was growing up to read. But again, a lot of the books I read, a lot of the main characters were white. So at the age of 14, I moved to England for boarding school. And it's very interesting because, again, the sort of generation I grew up in, there was that sort of, we can't wait to escape Nigeria, we can't wait to go abroad. So I finally get to the abroad at 14. And it was really interesting. There weren't any, I think there were 3 Black people in my school. One was me, the other one was my sister, and the third was another Nigerian girl. So there weren't. It was a very white school, and not only was it a very white school, it was a school where people didn't really know anything about Nigeria. So it's one thing to discount Nigeria for yourself and be like, oh, Nigeria is not cool, but at the same time, it's also still your home. And it's also majority of what you know. So to actually now leave Nigeria and enter a space where the people in my school, most of them had not heard of Nigeria before. And Nigeria is not a small country. We're the most populous country in Africa. But, you know, they hadn't heard of Nigeria. And their perception of Africa was, by and large, quite negative. So I was an African, and their perception of an African was sort of poverty and struggling and, you know, war. And, you know, I remember they used to raise a lot of funds for good causes in African countries. So there was that sort of idea of sort of Western people being the benefactors to Africans. So that was sort of the sort of environment I then moved to when I was 14. And so what the irony then became that I started writing about Nigeria when I moved outside of Nigeria, because suddenly I was called upon to sort of challenge. And it wasn't that I was called upon, but it's sort of like Lagosian in you. Like, you know, I can abuse my house, but nobody can abuse my house. So I remember in a classroom once, we were talking about wealth and how wealth is relative. And so the girls in our class were saying that, you know, basically what's rich for one person is not rich for another person. So like describing somebody as rich is relative. And so one of the girls in the classroom was like, well, say like in England, we're fairly sort of middle class. I think you would describe us as middle class. But if we moved to Africa, we would be super wealthy. And I was like, see this small rattle. I mean, I think her parents were sort of professionals. And I was like, excuse me, you would not be super wealthy in Africa because your name is not Aliko Dangote. I know your father is a doctor and your mother is a lawyer. You are not, you know, the definition of super wealthy. But this idea that, you know, when they went to Africa, that's where they would now be the rulers and, you know, be lording it over everybody. I was like, I'm sorry, does your father have a yacht? I mean, my own father too does not have a private plane, but there are Nigerians that have, please, you are not the description of super wealthy in Nigeria. Go and sit down. So yeah, sort of wanting to defend or wanting to, it's not even less about defending, but just wanting to make sure that my version of Nigeria was accounted, at least that I would talk about it. And so I started setting my fiction in Nigeria. I wasn't conscious of it. I wouldn't have said at this age that this was what I was doing. But now looking back as an adult or as an older person or somebody who's older, I can see that this was the sort of things that were influencing my writing choices and my writing decisions. And so I started setting my fiction in Nigeria. And yeah, just started exploring sort of the culture that I'd come from. And sometimes that distance does help. Being further away from Lagos sort of helped with a bit of perspective and helped me notice things that perhaps I often took for granted when I was growing up in Nigeria. But then when you step out of the culture, sometimes you think, that's interesting. Why do we do that? Or why does that work like that? And so then my first novel, The Spider King's Daughter, I started writing when I was a teenager, when I was 17. And then I got a publishing deal. I got signed to a publisher called Faber and Faber. I got an agent first. And I mean, we can talk about this more if it's something that people on the call are specifically interested in, sort of how you get an agent, how you get an agent in the UK at least, and how you get a publisher. So I got an agent, got a publisher, and then, yeah, I mean, I wrote The Spider King's Daughter. I wrote Welcome to Lagos. I did a PhD as well because my parents are Nigerian, and there was this sort of, I mean, my parents have been very encouraging, but there was this sort of feeling like, well, what if you don't earn any money from this? In CNN and BBC, but how you chop? How are you going to eat? And so sort of if you have a PhD, then it allows you to work in university as an academic in the UK anyway. That's sort of how the academic system here works. So they sort of thought it might be a useful thing for me to have. And so yes, I did one and I lectured for a year. But at the moment, upon all the PhD, you know, I'm writing full time and I'm enjoying it. But I suppose I have the option to go back to teach or lecture in a university in the future if I so wish. So yes, that is a middlingly brief introduction. And yes, Uche, you can now ask me some questions.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Incidentally, not to make this about me, but I am also born of mixed tribe. My
Okay.
mom is also Yoruba, is also do you find that tension sometimes comes through in your writing, that tribal tension, or does it never come through?
It's funny actually. What I think is normal is people from different ethnic groups getting along. Like I know people say there's like tribalism in Nigeria. And of course there's tribalism. I mean I've seen it, I've overheard it, but I also feel like intertribal harmony is normal because that is predominantly what I saw growing up. So not only is my mother Yoruba, my mother is from a Muslim family. So my grandfather on my mother's side was an Alaji, a polygamous Alaji. And also a doctor and other things. But he was a Muslim. And, you know, my dad is from an Igbo Christian family. And somehow these two people met and married. And like, you know, when it was Salah, you know, we would go to not so much me because I'm a bit younger, but like, you know, when my grandfather was alive, I didn't meet him alive. But when it was Salah, you know, they would go to his house and eat Salah meat. And, you know, so it's sort of like in my books, often, so in Welcome to Lagos, you know, there are Zochike is Igbo, his best friend Yemi is Yoruba, Isoke is Bini, Oma is also Igbo. I think Ahmed is a Muslim Yoruba. I sort of have a mix of different ethnicities and religions. And I remember one of the reviews that I read for Welcome to Lagos said that, you know, this was a bit idealistic, it's unrealistic for there to be no intertribal tensions. And I was like, well, I'm not saying intertribal tensions don't exist, but intertribal harmony also exists. You know, I see it, I live it, is my daily reality. So yes, I mean, I do explore these things, sort of, yes.
Thank you for that. I think it's also really interesting that you talked about basically embracing your identity and your heritage as a Nigerian and developing that Nigerian pride when you moved abroad, which is something that happens to quite a lot of young Nigerians. But for those of us who live at home, can you talk about, I read an article where you were talking about seeing Lagos differently whenever you visited. Can you just speak a little bit about that without romanticizing the environment, just seeing Lagos differently?
I think, so one thing is, the truth is we don't rate what we have, you know, which is sad, you know, and especially when it comes to cultural production. I listened to this great Instagram live discussion between a lady called Ugoma Adegoke and a journalist called Oris. And so Ugoma is like a gallerist and a curator, and Oris is also a cultural critic and journalist. And there was sometimes it's when something that is Nigerian is rated in a Western context. That's when, you know, we begin to rate it. And I'm so glad that I grew up in Nigeria. I'm so glad for like the strong sense of identity that growing up in Nigeria has given me. And I'm so glad for that sort of attitude towards success that Nigerians have. When they see somebody succeeding, the next thing is they don't have two heads. Not and I'm not saying that obstacles don't exist, but that sort of mindset and cultural mindset that, you know, Nigerians have, and that sort of and that hustling spirit that the hardship pushes people in Nigeria to have, and it makes us hate Nigeria a lot of the time. The lack of light, all these sort of things that make us hustle is also a lot of the things that make us thrive once we leave the Nigerian context. Because, like, you know, just sort of like that spirit. And I'm not saying, you know, you don't need no light 24/7 for a spirit of entrepreneurship or for a spirit of perseverance to be engendered. But that's the root that has made a lot of Nigerians, a lot of us have that sort of culture and that drive. So it is something that I appreciate a lot about Nigeria when I go back. You know, when I go back, all the people that I went to school with in Lagos that have moved back, they are working, you know, 9 to 5. They're also doing makeup business. They're also doing sewing business. Some of them are now on television. And I'm just like, in England, there is a set sort of steady path for a lot of people who come out of university. You go and get a job, and then you climb, and you go up, and this, that, and the other. But I don't know a single person that I went to university in this country, and I don't know a single person that has started any sort of business, even a nail polish business. Like, I don't know, a single person. And there's something about the Nigerian environment that creates entrepreneurship, that creates that I'm always very excited, when I go to Lagos. My dad is always teasing me, like, when you come to Lagos, you don't sleep, you're always outside the house. Whereas in England, that's not, here I'm always very relaxed, very je. So those are some of the things that I feel that sometimes when you leave Nigeria and you go back, you appreciate just the energy and the pace of the place. Yeah.
Very interesting insights, actually. And you are right. I have had that similar conversation with people about the hustle that you get from being here. There's a certain energy in the air. I think also for upcoming writers, what is the greatest bit of advice that you would give someone who's never written before but is keen on starting?
Well, there's two things actually. So the first one is read. I'm actually astonished by the number of people who want to be writers and don't read. In fact, I was thinking about this before I did this class. I remember it was a very brief mentorship. It was when I was sort of 22 or 23, and I was too young to be patient enough. And I joined this scheme to be a mentor. What did I know at 23? But I was mentoring this other person, this young girl or something. Oh, I can't remember. I can't remember, but I was mentoring this younger person, and I asked them what books they enjoyed reading, or what books in the last month they'd read and enjoyed or something. And they were like, oh, no, they don't have time to read. I said, you want to become a writer, but you don't have time to read books. Don't you know that reading books is the school? That's the university for writers. And it's only people who want to become writers that can say such a thing. I've never seen anybody who says, oh, I want to be an artist, but I don't want to look at other people's paintings. Or I want to be a musician, but I don't want to listen to other people's music. Or I want to be a doctor, but I don't want to go to medical school. I just have a talent for being a doctor. So yeah, it just doesn't make any sense. So that's, if you want to be a writer, you have to read. That's your biggest, learning ground, other people's books. So yeah, read widely, read a wide range of genres. I would say don't narrow your focus too soon. Like, I love reading books by Nigerian authors, by African authors. But then at the same time, I read outside my natural interest, which I'm naturally drawn to books set in Nigeria, set in Africa. But then, read widely. And then the second thing would be also start. Which seems so basic, but I think a lot of the time, again, sometimes people go circle around this mountain of I want to write, so I want to write. I'm like, start now. Who is stopping you? Like, you just need a pen and a piece of paper. Even if you don't have pen, use a pencil. There's no grand Angel Gabriel moment that's going to anoint you and say, oh yeah, come and be a writer. And all writing that you do is practice. So, it doesn't matter if, your first book or your first attempt at a book isn't successful. Before I finished The Spider King's Daughter, as I said, I started writing my first novel when I was 10, but I didn't finish that novel. In fact, I didn't finish any of the novels I started until The Spider King's Daughter. But none of those efforts were wasted because I was practicing my skills, or sort of honing my craft as a writer. So yeah, those two, read and start.
Great advice. Thank you. So what has been your approach to writing during the coronavirus pandemic? I think a lot of people are finding it hard to be productive despite having seemingly all this time. But what's been your approach to writing, since you're writing full time right now?
So yeah, at first I was like, well, what has changed? Everybody was like, well, working from home. I'm like, well, me, I work from home every day. But working from home in a pandemic is different from working from home when you're working from home and you can go to Nando's in the evening, and you can, I don't know, hang out with your friends in the evening. So yeah, it took some adjusting. I'm increasingly not one to put, a lot of pressure on myself. So I tell people that it's incremental progress over a long period of time is what creates a novel. So like I'm rounding up on my third novel and I'm starting another project, but I never said to myself, oh, I need to finish writing my next novel in this pandemic. I'm like, even under normal circumstances, without any coronavirus, I've never written a novel in 2 months. So why? Is it because of coronavirus and I want to now come and kill myself? I say, no. In the words of Burna Boy, I can't come and kill myself. Oh. So what I do is I write a little bit, 200 words, 500 words, 150 words. But it's that 150 words over time. If you do a little bit over time every day, then you'll find out that in 2 months, it's like, oh, I have 15,000 words. I have 20,000 words. Oh, I have half of a novel. I have a novel. I have a friend who has been trying to write a book maybe for about 8 years. And I always tell him, he keeps telling me, because he has a full-time job. So he keeps saying, oh, he just needs to go away on holiday not go away on holiday, like go away to somewhere in the middle of nowhere where there's no internet and just stay there for 3 weeks or stay there for 1 month and finish his book. And I keep telling him that if in this time he had just said, I'm going to write 300 words in a week, not even in a day, 300 words in a week, over these 7 years that you have been singing this song, you have finished writing this book by now. You have finished this novel, but because, there's that sort of, there's this sort of romanticization of the creative process that, writers, the inspiration just hits you and then you just enter one room and then you don't eat for 1 month and bish bash and then you just come out and you have written a novel. It's a lie. Well, maybe it's like that for some people, but for most people I know who are writers, it's not like that. You just do it small. And then over a large period of time, you have a novel. So that's what I would say to anybody who wants to write in this period. Take your time and do it small. Stop thinking about sort of like the finished product. Stop thinking about how am I going to write 70,000 words or 80,000 words, Just focus on like the next 100 words, the next 200 words. And then it's that sort of persistence, constantly coming back over a long period of time. That's what gets you a novel.
Thank you. That's actually very encouraging. We have a question from Esther. She says, do you feel pressure to write about... Sorry, can you hear me? Okay, she says, do you feel pressure to write about certain issues? For instance, writing only about Nigerian culture, defending Africa against the negative perception most people have about the continent, slavery, etc. So do you feel pressure to write about those topics?
No, I don't want to defend Africa. It's funny actually. I went for a reading once where the short story that I read from one of the characters, who was a Nigerian man living in England, was afraid to take home his children to his village in the east because of kidnapping. Well, he wasn't afraid, but his wife, who was English, was afraid for the whole family to go because of kidnapping in that has happened, because of kidnapping stories they'd heard. And so I read this short story, and a woman stood up in the audience and was annoyed with me. She was a Nigerian woman, and it was a mixed audience. And she stood up and she was annoyed, and she was like, why are you writing about kidnapping, or why are you writing about something negative? And why can't we always, why must we focus on all the bad news stories? And I said to her, and I always say is that the Ministry of Culture and Tourism, I am not on their payroll. So it is not my job to burnish and present this, brochure image of Nigeria or of Lagos or of wherever. That's not my job as a writer. But I suppose what my writing does, and what I hope it does to challenge, is I don't shy away from the fact that there's poverty in Lagos. So my first novel, in The Spider King's Daughter, one of the main characters is the hawker. And also in Welcome to Lagos, there's a bit where they're homeless, where they live under the bridge. I don't shy away from the fact that there are these things that happen, but there are also people who are wealthy. There are also middle class people. There are also people who have access to some of the finer things of life, and they coexist side by side. Just as the same way in the UK, you have people who are homeless and you have people who are wealthy. So, like, why is this so shocking for there to be a middle class story of Nigeria? Like, it's not the only story that exists, but in the same way, poverty and hardship and, suffering are not the only things that exist in that space. So I don't sort of see my work as trying to defend. I'm not trying to say that negative things never happen in Nigeria. It's not heaven. There's no place on earth that is heaven. Bad things happen everywhere. But it's that I want to show in my work more, I suppose, just more nuance, basically. So I suppose, in short, no, I don't feel pressure as such, no, to write on certain topics.
Great, thank you for that. So next question, I think, have you thought about taking what it would look like you mentioned representation when you started speaking, and seeing people that were only like white-skinned, American, British on screen. What do you think about taking African stories to the big screen? Have you thought about doing that with your own stories? And what do you think the future is for African stories in media?
Well, I mean, my brother is doing that to a large extent. So my brother, shameless family plug, my brother is the co-founder of something called Inkplot. And they have quite a few movies on Netflix. So he did most recently what's that movie? Love is War with RMG and Omoni Oboli. That's one of his films. And also The Setup and Arbitration and quite a few sort of films. So I suppose he's sort of in that industry already. So he writes scripts and he produces them. Is this something I want to do? Yes, I'm definitely open to it. First of all, it pays, especially in this context. It pays really well. So I'm from Lagos. Give me the money. Just bring the ego. So yes, I mean, it's definitely something I'm open to, that I'm possibly, yes, I could say I've started pursuing it. So one of my short stories was turned into a short film. So I co-adapted the script. I adapted it with somebody else. We changed it from a short story to a script for a film, about 15 minutes long. So I suppose, yes, I'm on that journey. I've started that journey, and I suppose, yeah, watch this space. I'm definitely open to it.
Thanks. You have a great sense of humor, by the way.
Yeah, man. Yes, I'm funny.
You are actually. How about with people who are just trying to connect to their audience and just starting out with writing, but they want to do it full time? Do you have any thoughts, any suggestions for how to supplement a writer's income, basically?
So I mean, I'll be honest. I mean, I earned very little money at the start of my career. So, I mean, so when I signed my book deal, it's a lump sum and it seems like a lot of money. And objectively it is. But the thing is, it's broken up. So my lump sum was broken up into 5. And I think eventually it was paid over 5 years. So by the time you divide that money into 5, and you pay it over 5 years, you begin to see that the money that you were jumping for, you stop jumping for it because it is well below minimum wage. So it was sort of, and which is why sort of my parents were like, it would be useful for you to have something like a PhD or something that you can supplement your income from writing with. And so for me, I mean, I was fortunate, or I am fortunate, in that. So for example, like, I was earning from writing, and I was writing for places like The Guardian, and that helped. But what also helped was that I didn't have to pay rent. So I live in my family home here. And so if you can find somebody that will let you be lodging in their house without paying rent, that's a good way to start your career as a full-time writer. And I mean, another thing, actually, I mean, I think about this now. So if I had lived in Nigeria and earned the money that I earned from writing in a Nigerian context, then yeah, maybe I might have been okay in a Nigerian context, because obviously like the pound is more naira. So that might have worked. But then at the same time, if I was living in Nigeria, would I have gotten those opportunities? I do know that what can be very lucrative is if you live in Nigeria, so you're living in naira, but you find a way, you know, you get an agent in England and your book is bought in England and then, or is bought in America. And so you're earning foreign exchange for living in Nigeria. So that could work as well. But it is difficult. I'm not going to, I mean, whatever, you know, it is difficult, whether you're living in Nigeria, living in England, living in America, like writing full time, it's not easy. And a lot of people have financial support. They may not tell you they have financial support, but especially at the start of their career, a lot of people do have financial support, whether it's from a spouse or from parents, or from working a 9-to-5 job. And I would say, yeah, there's no shame in that. Like, if you can't write full time right at the start of your career, that's fine. I mean, I couldn't. So yeah, there's no shame in that.
Okay, thanks. Someone sent in a question, but I think you've already addressed that. Do you have a process for writing a novel? I think you've already shared your process. Or do you want to share more about your process?
No, basically what I said about the incremental progress.
Yeah, great. So I was going to ask, as a historian, I don't know if you're aware that history was recently scrapped from the Nigerian curriculum. How important do you think it is for us to understand our history to be able to tell African stories in writing?
Oh no, it's important. Forget writing. It's just important to understand your history for life. You know, it's because we don't learn history in school that the current president of Nigeria is the current president of Nigeria. Because if we had learned history and we had researched into the military dictatorships that, you know, people like our current president presided over, there's no way they can repackage such people as Democrats, you know. So, you know, there's just no way. But yeah, history for life, you know, is essential just for life. You know where you're coming from, so you don't make those same mistakes. And I would say it puts things in perspective. So even just, for example, in this, you know, sort of coronavirus pandemic, you know, everybody's shouting, you know, like, how is the world going to look after, you know, this pandemic? Because, you know, we've been in quarantine for so long, you know, things can't go back to the way they were before. And people think that things would change permanently because they changed temporarily during a pandemic. And it's like, you just need to look at history to know that that reasoning is faulty, because this is not the first time we have had a pandemic. We have pandemic in 1918. It's called the Spanish flu. It went across the whole world. It killed people in Nigeria even. It went across the whole world. And it didn't change the global economic systems. It didn't change, you know, imperialism continued to exist. Like, it didn't bring about the mass. Yes, there were some parts of the world that were in quarantine for over a year. But then when the disease disappeared, it went back to business as usual. So yeah, I would say, yeah, you need sort of history to give you a perspective that, like, sort of any change that you want to see, you have to be deliberate about it. You have to be intentional about it. Yeah, basically. I don't even know if this answers the question about history and writing, but yeah, it gives you perspective.
Okay, great. We have 2 more questions, and I think they actually are also kind of bits of what you've already addressed, but maybe you'll just want to touch on them. Do you have any advice for balancing writing with school, or a traditional job, and any advice for new authors?
Yeah, balancing writing. So I mean, I started writing at 17, so I was still in secondary school, basically. I was doing my A-levels. And I remember my last report in secondary school wasn't that great. So yeah, because I wasn't concentrating on school. I was like, I'm writing a novel. I'm going to become the next J.K. Rowling. Please don't disturb me with exams. Exams are for mere mortals. But I think, yeah, I haven't always been great at balancing it. And I think that's because I'm a bit of an ethical as well. That my last negative report card, I was like, hey, I cannot fail. Oh, cannot come all the way to London to fail. So I would say the balance is you just have to find what works for you. So what worked for me was that I only did one thing at a time. So when I was doing school, I did school. And when I was writing my novel, I wrote my novel. So if that meant that maybe, because when you get to university, you get to start organizing your time a bit more. So I was like, I do schoolwork on Monday to Wednesday, and I don't touch my novel. I don't touch any creative writing at all. Even if I have the best idea, I just write it down somewhere and I don't touch my novel. So I do school on Monday to Wednesday, and then I do creative writing on Thursday to Friday, and then I don't touch schoolwork, even if I have a deadline, or whatever. And that was how I balanced it for myself. But then that might not work for somebody who was working in 9 to 5 and had a family or whatever. Maybe sometimes it may mean having to wake up earlier. I know Toni Morrison used to wake up at 5 a.m. Man, it's not for me, but she used to wake up at 5 a.m. to write. And then by 7, she was ready to start her day, and she was a mother as well, and socialize and go to work. But she had to have that time a lot earlier in the morning. And then I suppose then for her, that meant that she would also have to sleep earlier to keep waking up at 5 a.m. So I think, yeah, just everybody needs to find sort of the process that works for them, I would say.
Wow, thank you. That's actually really good insight. I guess a question would be about characters. Now, how do you flesh out a character in your writing that it doesn't feel like a stock character or a flat character, that it feels like a whole person? How do you really approach that?
Well, I think, yeah, the answer is in the second part of your question. Like, you have to think of your characters as people. And you have to think of them as people. And so when you think of a character as a person, they don't just do things because you are trying to prove a point, or they don't just do things because, you need XYZ to happen to move your plot ahead. They do things because that's in keeping with that person's character. So, like, again, like using an actual person. So, like, my dad, let's say my dad was a character in a novel, like he's a person. So, like, my dad doesn't use abusive language. Like, he doesn't even tell people to shut up. And I like, if you say around him, like, like, you're crazy, like, also, or not too, obviously, I cannot tell my father it's crazy. Am I crazy? No, but if you say, like, if you're on the phone or something and he heard you using abusive language, he would be like, what sort of, you will get told off, basically. So he's very principled and sort of has a very strict moral code. Now, I cannot know because I want XYZ to happen in my novel, now say that this person that I presented as principled and very upright is now going to steal $5 million from the government, because then the question will be like, where did this come from? So you have to show, even if, okay, let's say a principled person can become unprincipled, but then you have to show how this person became unprincipled. You can't just go from having somebody that is upright throughout the novel, and then suddenly at the end, they just become a bad person. And in fact, this happens in a lot of old Nollywood movies. That's why you end it and you'll be very frustrated, because you will see somebody that is very evil throughout the novel or throughout the film. Then at the end, they have just become a born again, to God be the glory, and they are now a good person. And you're like, but I'm sorry, it doesn't follow. Like, what were the steps? I'm not saying that transformations don't happen, but like, make them believable, because you have to treat this person as a person, as opposed to as like, you want your movie to end this way, everybody lives happily ever after, so you just tie up everything neatly. So I would say, treat your characters as people and think of the real people in your lives, and how do they behave and how do they act. And I would say, you just think of them as people as opposed to characters, and that will help.
Thank you so much for that. So Janet asked again, apparently we didn't answer her question. Do you have any advice for new authors? I don't know if she means published authors or someone who's just authored a book, published or not.
Do you have any advice for new authors? So as I said, it's actually one thing I haven't said is finding a community, or finding people who will read your work and critique your work. So for me, I'm fortunate that's my family members. So most of my siblings are readers. So the first people I send my work to is like my mom, my sister, my brother, and then we discuss and they critique, and that sort of. And it's important to learn how to listen without getting defensive, because if people know that you're going to get defensive about the feedback that they give you, then they're not going to give you honest feedback. And I mean, it's easier said than done, because something you've produced as a writer is very close to you and you want people to praise it, you want people to enjoy it. And sometimes hopefully if the person is nice, they will put their criticism in a way that is not too harsh, but sometimes the ending doesn't make sense, this doesn't follow, and you need somebody to tell you that and be like, yeah, this I'm confused, this doesn't make sense. So yeah, sort of being, maybe start a blog, keep a diary. If you don't feel ready to write a novel yet, just as long as you're writing something, start writing longer Instagram posts. Don't just do hashtag, I don't know, turn up Lagos. Describe the turn up before you now put hashtag turn up Lagos. But like, practice, basically. Look for ways to practice and to hone your skill.
Great. That humor coming through steady as usual. Okay, so have you found that being an academic, has academic writing affected your fiction writing?
That's a good question. I mean, it's very, very different. So it's really different. So sort of writing like a historical journal article, like you can't, there are very strict rules. So you can't, anything that there is no evidence for, you generally just don't put it in the piece. Whereas writing is about your imagination and about things you can make up and things you can infer. So yeah, they're very different. I think what I brought to history from my writing was a strong narrative voice. But what I also needed to learn as a historian was a strong argument. So history is not just about the story. History is about people's position on the story. So the story of the neutral story is that Abacha was military dictator from X year to YZ to Y year. But then a historian's perspective on that fact is Abacha was the worst thing economically that happened for Nigeria, or Abacha was the best thing economically that happened for Nigeria, or like you have to have a perspective. You also have to have an opinion on the facts, and I think that's what I had to learn sort of for my PhD. That it's not enough to present the facts in a compelling way. It's also important to say what's my position on these facts, and to like have an argument about the past. So yeah, I would say that would be the main difference between the two styles of writing.
Thank you. So we have another question. How do you deal with any personal biases that may crop up when writing? How do you separate your personal feelings from the facts?
How do I deal with personal biases? Well, I would say, so like I'm a Christian, and but I wouldn't describe what I write as Christian fiction. I'm a Christian who writes fiction, and sometimes there's this sort of tension where sort of people feel like, well, if you are a Christian, then none of your characters in your book should use swear words, for example. So like I generally don't swear, but then I'm a writer who is capturing the world, and there are people in the world that do swear. Not everybody is a Christian. So I suppose, yeah, things like that. Sometimes I think sometimes people feel like if you're a Christian, you shouldn't I don't know, your novel shouldn't have any sex in it or something. But I don't know if they read their Bible upside down, because there's also quite a bit of sex in the Bible, but it's called Songs of Solomon, but that one is a story for another day. But I would say, yeah, maybe sometimes things like that. I've heard feedback like that, maybe from people. Yeah, maybe.
Great. I think, okay, let's even explore the impact of faith and writing. Really, how's that really been an influence for you? How's it been an influence for you? I've heard that you were really influenced by C.S. Lewis.
Yes, the Chronicles of Narnia. I mean, I would say, so C.S. Lewis I love the Chronicles of Narnia. I also love his non-fiction writing, like his essays, like his Christian apologetics about sort of being a Christian and how he came from being an atheist to Christian. I love that style of his writing, and I would say maybe he's influenced more of the non-fiction things that I write, because I mean, it is something that I want to explore more in my fiction, but more in my non-fiction. Like I want to write about, in a literary way, about the experience of being a Christian, which is what I think C.S. Lewis captured so brilliantly in his work. But I always try to have a character in my novels who is a Christian, and I always try to make sure that it is a positive representation of Christianity. Like they don't have to be the main character, but I always try to have one. So in The Spider King's Daughter, there was Auntie Precious, and in Welcome to Lagos, they sort of explore some Christian themes. And then in my novel that I'm working on now, it's sort of the same thing. So I always try to have at least one. Yeah, just because like I feel like there are not enough positive representations of Christians in the mainstream, where they are not like the weird person, or like they are not the person that is, I don't know, telling everybody they are going to go to hell, or we're always portrayed as very Raz. And I'm like, I'm not Raz. I am a very fly person. Even if I am the only fly Christian, which is not true, even if I'm the only one, at least let my own view also be represented in the mainstream, in the so-called mainstream anyway. So, I mean, I always try to have at least one. Yeah.
That's great. I think it's nice that you're putting your voice out there. I think I'm also a fly Christian, but that's just by the way.
We're going to start a group.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. This has been so informative. Really loaded in excellent content, in wisdom and knowledge. So I think I'm going to dust off my writing pad in quotes, and I'm going to get to it. I don't think there are any more questions, but can you let us know if we wanted to connect with you? How would we connect with you, aside from Instagram, or is that the only way we can reach you?
I'm on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. But the last time I did one of these things, I was like, I'm not an influencer. I don't make money from my Instagram. The most important way you can connect with me is by buying my book. Connect with me by purchasing my book, so that me too, I can live in Banana Island one day. So yes, that's the most important way you can connect with me. Buy my books, read my books, and also I write for The Guardian in the UK, and their page is open. So yeah, you can read my articles on The Guardian. And of course, you can also follow me on social media at Chibundu Onuzo.